In the year 2035, Kael reached the absolute pinnacle of humanity. He was the world's only SS rank hunter, the man who cleared the final dungeon. But his reward wasn't glory. It was a blade through the heart. The elite noble families, terrified of a commoner holding so much power, conspired to assassinate him the moment the war ended. As Kael bled out on the dungeon floor, his rage triggered an anomaly. The world's governing system glitched. When he opened his eyes, the ruins were gone. He was sitting in the dorms of the Royal Magic Academy. He had regressed exactly 10 years into the past. But something was different. The standard blue system window had corrupted. It was completely crimson, displaying a class that had never existed in human history, the Void Sovereign. It was Awakening Day. The day every student's innate magic class and power level were publicly measured and permanently ranked by the Academy. Arya, the very woman who would assassinate him 10 years in the future, stepped up first. The crystal erupted in blinding light, registering her as an ultra-rare S-rank ice mage. The nobles cheered, cementing her status as the Academy's prodigy. Then, Kael's name was called. The talentless commoner, who had begged to enroll. Kael didn't care about the whispers. He placed his hand on the measuring stone. The void system instantly devoured the crystal's sensory mana. Unable to comprehend his corrupted power, the Academy's measuring device glitched and spit out a humiliating result, F rank. Unclassified. The hall erupted into laughter. Arya looked at him with pure disgust, loudly declaring that trash like him shouldn't even be allowed to breathe the same air as nobles. Kael just smirked and walked away. Let them laugh. While they played with their fragile little spells, Kael's void system was casually absorbing the ambient mana of the entire Academy. That night, Kael ventured into the Academy's forbidden hunting grounds to test his new corrupted stats. He didn't need to chant, and he didn't need a wand. With a single thought, he ripped the shadow off a dead A-rank monster and bound it to his absolute command. The F-rank failure of the Academy was secretly building an army of the Abyss. And when the midterm combat tournament arrived, he was going to break every single noble who stood in his way. A month later, the midterm combat tournament began. The Colosseum was packed with nobles eager to watch the lower-class students get publicly humiliated. Kael's first opponent was Julian, Arya's top henchman and an A-rank lightning mage. He had explicitly rigged the brackets just to torture Kael. Without waiting for the referee's signal, Julian unleashed a lethal, high-tier lightning barrage, intending to cripple the F-rank student in the first 3 seconds. But the lightning never reached him. Kael didn't dodge or cast a shield. His passive void aura simply devoured the magic like a black hole. Before Julian could process the impossibility, Kael closed the distance in a single step and delivered a casual, brutal backhand. The elite noble was sent flying like a broken ragdoll, crashing into the arena's reinforced barrier so hard that the magical glass fractured. The stadium went dead silent. Up in the VIP balcony, Arya gripped the railing in pure fury. An F-rank just one-shot her strongest vanguard. But the shock didn't last. Down in the referee pit, Professor Vane's monitoring crystal began screaming with a blaring, blood-red anomaly warning. The impact against the barrier had triggered a latent dimensional fracture. The sky tore open, and a true S-rank dungeon boss dropped directly into the student arena. It was a massacre waiting to happen. The pampered aristocrats, who had only ever fought practice targets, broke formation and fled in absolute terror. Arya tried to play the hero, unleashing her ultimate zero-degree frost spell. The demon boss shattered her ice wall with a single, contemptuous swipe. The prodigy fell to her knees, realizing the terrifying difference between school grades and actual, life-or-death survival. The beast raised its claw for the kill. Arya squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for death. But it never came. Kael had stepped in front of her, his shadow expanding unnaturally across the arena floor. Kael didn't move a muscle. He simply let his newly awakened shadow soldier handle the trash. In one blinding strike, the S-rank boss was decapitated. Kael glanced down at the trembling ice noble. "Try not to get in my way next time," he whispered, as a red level-up window chimed. By the time the Academy's elite security finally breached the arena, the battle was already over. Kael silently recalled his shadow soldier before they could identify it. Terrified of taking the blame for the security breach, Professor Vane immediately pointed the finger at Kael, accusing him of using forbidden demonic arts to summon the beast. Arya watched in silence. She knew the truth. That monster hadn't belonged to Kael, Kael was simply the monster that killed it. But her pride wouldn't let her speak up. Within the hour, Kael was dragged into the Academy's underground interrogation block. The headmaster demanded his immediate expulsion and a memory wipe. But before the headmaster could sign the expulsion papers, the iron doors blew open. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. It wasn't the Royal Guard. It was the Awakened Guild, the autonomous, militarized organization that handled S-rank gates worldwide. And they answered to no king. Commander Thorn, the vanguard of the Awakened Guild, slammed a classified dossier onto the table. He told the headmaster to sit down and shut up. Thorn didn't care about Academy politics. His satellites had tracked the massive spike in void mana. He knew exactly what Kael had done in that arena. "We have an S-rank gate opening in the northern sector in 3 days, Thorn stated bluntly. "My strike team is short a vanguard. I want you." Before Kael could reject the offer, his corrupted system flared to life, issuing a mandatory emergency quest to enter the northern gate. Kael's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. The last time he entered an S-rank gate, he was betrayed. This time, he was the one holding all the cards. He stood up, casually shattering the Academy's supposedly unbreakable anti-magic cuffs as if they were made of brittle glass. "I'll take the job," Kael replied, his voice echoing in the silent room. "But I have 3 conditions, and the Awakened Guild is going to pay for every single one of them." Leaving the terrified headmaster behind, Kael walked out of the underground block. The F-rank trash of Solaria Academy had just become the highest-paid mercenary in the kingdom. In 3 days, Kael would step into the northern gate. And the Awakened Guild was about to find out what a true Void Sovereign looked like. The northern S-rank gate wasn't just a dungeon, it was a death trap. As the Awakened Guild's transport hovered over the frozen peaks, the air itself seemed to scream with mana pressure. Back at Solaria Academy, the high-ranking nobles gathered in the Grand Hall. They expected to watch the F-rank commoner die in the first 5 minutes of the live broadcast. Kael stepped into the sub-zero temperatures without a single shiver. To him, this cold was nothing compared to the absolute zero of the void. The moment they crossed the threshold, the gate mutated. Hundreds of S-rank frost giants erupted from the ice, a force far greater than Thorn's team had prepared for. Thorn roared, his silver axe cleaving through the giants, but for every one he killed, 10 more rose from the frozen ground. The elite team was being slowly crushed. At the Academy, Arya gripped her seat. She realized that if Kael didn't act, the kingdom's greatest guild was about to be wiped out in real time. One giant lunged at Kael, its fist the size of a boulder. The Academy students gasped, waiting for the commoner's head to explode. Kael simply snapped his fingers. The air itself imploded. The giant didn't just die, it was erased from existence by a burst of pure void energy. "Awaken," Kael whispered. His shadow surged outward, and 10 Abyss-tier soldiers rose from the darkness, their power levels dwarfing everything in the room. It wasn't a fight, it was a harvest. The shadow soldiers tore through the S-rank giants like they were made of thin glass, clearing a path for their sovereign. In the Grand Hall, Professor Vane collapsed to his knees. The manometer had hit 999,999 and shattered. The F-rank student was displaying the power of a god. Thorn stood frozen. He had come to recruit a vanguard, but he realized he was standing in the presence of an emperor. At the heart of the gate stood the reason for the mutation, the Frostfire Dragon. A creature that shouldn't exist in this world. Kael looked at the beast and smiled. This was exactly why he had regressed. This dragon's soul was the final ingredient he needed for his void armor. While the world watched in stunned silence, Kael leaped. He didn't use a spell. He reached into the void and pulled out the dragon's own destiny. The impact shook the entire northern mountain range. The invincible S-rank boss didn't even get to breathe its frost fire before Kael forced it to the ground. Kael stared into the beast's giant, terrified eye. "You were a king in the abyss," he whispered, his voice dripping with void mana. "But here, you are just materials." With a brutal surge of crimson lightning, Kael shattered the dragon's mana core. The behemoth crumbled into black ash instantly. But Kael wasn't done. "Arise," he commanded. From the ashes of the beast, a massive, terrifying shadow dragon tore its way into reality, bowing its head to its new sovereign. A red system window flashed, confirming his new mount. The awakened Guild Strike team watched in absolute awe. The gate was cleared in less than 10 minutes. Back at Solaria Academy, the live feed abruptly cut out. But the nobles had seen enough. The silence in the grand hall was deafening. Arya clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The commoner she had called trash possessed power that her prestigious bloodline couldn't even comprehend. 2 days later, the Academy's atmosphere had completely shifted. Everyone was waiting for the return of the F-rank student. When Kael finally walked through the front gates, the courtyard parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to look him in the eye. Julian and the noble bullies who had tormented him just weeks ago practically scrambled to bow their heads as he passed. The hierarchy was broken. Kael took his seat in the back of the class, acting completely unbothered by the heavy, terrified stares of his classmates. Even Professor Vane was a nervous wreck, stuttering through his lecture on advanced mana theory and actively avoiding calling on Kael. Unable to handle the oppressive tension, Arya finally snapped. She slammed her hands on her desk and turned to face him, demanding answers. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the silent classroom. Kael just tilted his head, a cold smirk forming on his lips. "I'm just an F-rank student, Arya," Kael replied smoothly. "Now turn around, before I fail you out of my class." The peace Kael forced upon the academy didn't last long. At midnight, beneath a blood-red moon, a chilling presence pierced through the academy's ancient wards. From the absolute void of the shadows, a blade lunged. It wasn't a clumsy student or a corrupt professor. It was a professional killer from the future. Kael didn't even turn around. He simply tilted his head by a single millimeter, letting the lethal, poison-tipped dagger graze the empty air. The assassin leaped back in shock. "You shouldn't be this fast yet," a muffled, mechanical voice rasped from behind the mask. He remembered the future. Kael's eyes narrowed. A temporal echo. The regression hadn't just sent him back, it had leaked fragments of memory to the people who had hunted him. "I was paid to kill the SS rank sovereign," the wraith roared, splitting into 10 shadow clones simultaneously. "Killing a teenage version of you is child's play." Down in the courtyard, Arya had tracked the mana disturbance. She looked up at the roof, her breath catching as she witnessed a level of combat that shouldn't exist within the city walls. Kael didn't bother using his shadow army for a rat. He raised a single hand, condensing a micro-black hole of pure void mana at his fingertip. He closed his fist. The spatial gravity imploded. The 10 shadow clones were violently dragged toward the center, their stealth magic tearing to shreds. Before the real assassin could execute a escape spell, Kael's hand locked around his throat, shattering his dual daggers into dust with raw physical strength. The assassin's mask cracked. Looking into Kael's crimson eyes, he realized a horrifying truth: this version of Kael wasn't weaker than the future version. He was significantly stronger. Without a second thought, Kael slammed him into the crystal roof, crushing his armor and pinning him to the shattered glass. "Who sent you?" Kael asked coldly. The assassin coughed blood, remaining silent. Kael didn't mind. His system could read the dead just as easily as the living. Arya finally burst onto the roof, her ice magic armed and ready. She stopped dead in her tracks. The high-tier international threat had already been completely dismantled. Kael walked past her into the shadows of the stairwell. "Lock your doors tonight, princess," he muttered. "The war from the future has officially arrived." Back in his dorm, Kael crushed the Wraith's soul. The Void system instantly decoded the assassin's memories, giving Kael the exact location of the employers. It was Julian's father, Lord Vance. The elite families were operating a secret underground syndicate beneath the capital, funding illegal hits to maintain their power. Deep beneath the commercial district, the corrupt nobles were celebrating. They believed the Wraith's mission was already a guaranteed success. Lord Vance raised his glass, boasting to the syndicate about how he had permanently solved the Academy's little F-rank problem, with a single paycheck. His toast was interrupted by the deafening roar of grinding metal. The syndicate's impenetrable vault doors violently imploded, sent flying across the grand hall. Through the settling dust, a single figure walked in. Kael didn't bother sneaking into the syndicate. He knocked on the front door. Vance dropped his wine glass, his arrogant face twisting into sheer panic. He screamed for his elite syndicate guards to execute the intruder immediately. Kael didn't even draw a weapon. He simply snapped his fingers. The shadows in the luxurious hall began to warp and stretch unnaturally. From the abyss beneath his feet, Ignis emerged. The S-rank shadow dragon materialized inside the underground hall, its massive frame crushing the marble pillars. With a single breath of black fire, Ignis melted the elite guards' weapons into slag. The syndicate's entire defense force was neutralized in 3 seconds. Using a perfectly executed spatial blink, Kael bypassed the chaos and appeared instantly face-to-face with Lord Vance. Kael lifted the aristocrat off the floor by his collar. "You paid 3 billion for my head," Kael whispered. "I'm here to collect the refund." Unbeknownst to Kael, he had been followed. Hiding in the upper ventilation grates, Arya watched in horror as the F-rank student single-handedly dismantled the capital's criminal underworld. After securing the syndicate's ledger of corrupt dealings on a data drive, Kael dropped the weeping noble and walked away. The elite families were officially on notice. Stepping back onto the neon-lit streets, Kael adjusted his jacket. The academy was a playground, but the real war for the kingdom had just begun. The next morning, the academy returned to its pristine, peaceful illusion. The elite students gossiped in the grand lecture hall, unaware that their criminal underworld had been reduced to ashes. Arya, however, hadn't slept a wink. She sat frozen at her desk, her mind replaying the terrifying image of Kael's shadow dragon incinerating the syndicate guards. She kept glancing at the back of the room. There he was. The anomaly. The F-rank commoner who secretly held the power to destroy the entire kingdom. Professor Vane was mid-lecture when a massive shadow suddenly eclipsed the sun. The reinforced glass windows rattled violently from intense mana pressure. Hovering just outside the Academy Tower was a Vanguard-class assault airship. The personal transport of the awakened guild's highest command. The heavy oak doors of the classroom slammed open. Commander Thorn strode in, his scarred face and immense battle aura suffocating the air in the room. The nobles gasped. Commander Thorn was a living legend, a man who answered only to the king. Professor Vane practically tripped over himself to bow. But Thorn completely ignored the professor. He ignored the elite nobles. He marched straight down the center aisle toward the back of the room. He stopped at the very last desk. The entire class held their breath, assuming the guild was here to arrest the trash F-rank student for some crime. Instead, Thorn reached into his coat and slammed a sleek, glowing black platinum card onto Kael's desk. The official insignia of an S-rank guild master. Commander. Julian blurted out, unable to contain his aristocratic pride. There must be a mistake. That peasant is an F-rank failure. Thorn slowly turned his head. He didn't shout. He just unleashed a fraction of his killing intent. Speak again, boy, and I'll rip your tongue out. Julian collapsed into his chair, suffocating under the pressure. The message was clear: Kael was under the absolute protection of the awakened guild. Kael casually picked up the black card, twirling it between his fingers. The F-rank title he hid behind was no longer a shield, it was a punchline. As Thorn left the room, the Academy's hierarchy permanently shattered. Kael looked at the card and smiled. The tutorial was officially over. The fragile peace broke exactly 3 days later. Without warning, a Citadel-class dimensional rift tore open directly above the capital city of Ethelgard. It wasn't a standard dungeon gate. It was a full-scale invasion. Thousands of winged abyss creatures poured from the sky, instantly overwhelming the royal guard. The Solaria Magic Academy, once a safe haven for the elite, became ground zero. The aristocratic students who played at being mages were suddenly faced with a real war. To her credit, Arya didn't run. She stood her ground in the courtyard, exhausting her mana to protect the younger students, including Kael's sister, Elara. But against a Vanguard-class invasion, S-rank ice magic wasn't enough. A massive Blood Fiend commander crashed into the courtyard, raising its twin greatswords to execute the prodigy. The blades never fell. With a deafening crack of displaced air, Kael blinked directly above the giant, driving his heel down with the force of a meteor. The 15-foot demon was driven face-first into the concrete, its skull fracturing under the sheer physical pressure of Kael's strike. Kael slowly stood up, dusting off his black academy uniform. A red system window flashed before his eyes. The void system was unlocking his maximum output. You made a mistake coming to my city, Kael whispered. He spread his arms, and the shadows beneath him exploded outward like a tidal wave. Arise. It wasn't 10 soldiers this time. It wasn't 100. An army of 10,000 immortal Shadow Knights pulled themselves from the abyss. Ignis, the Shadow Dragon, took to the skies with a deafening roar, tearing through the swarm of flying gargoyles like a black comet. Kael walked forward at a casual pace while his immortal army surged past him, turning the academy courtyard into an absolute slaughterhouse. Arya dropped her ice magic, falling to her knees. She finally understood. Kael wasn't just a strong hunter. He was an army of one. He was a sovereign. From the high balconies of the royal palace, the king and his elite mages watched in absolute awe as a tidal wave of black shadows eradicated the apocalyptic threat in minutes. Standing atop a mountain of defeated demons, Kael looked out over the city. The elite families wanted to control the kingdom. But Kael had just conquered it. To protect Kael from international assassination guilds, Commander Thorn took full credit for the city's defense. The world believed the awakened guild had saved the capital. Kael returned to Solaria Academy exactly as he left it, the F-rank anomaly that the elite nobles preferred to ignore. Only Arya knew the terrifying truth. She sat in class, staring at the back of his head, sweating. The trash of the academy was secretly the god of the abyss. But the academy's internal politics were about to be disrupted. It was the year of the Inter-Academy Arcane Tournament, and the rival schools had finally arrived. Zenith Institute, a militaristic academy that bred ruthless combat mages, led the vanguard. Their top prodigy, Leon, stepped off his carriage with a sneer. The Zenith elites didn't respect Solaria's prestige. They immediately began bullying the lower-class students in the courtyard, asserting their dominance. Sylvia, Zenith's top marksman, fired warning shots at the feet of the terrified underclassmen, laughing as they scrambled. Kael was walking across the courtyard, reading a book on advanced mana theory. He didn't care about academy rivalries or tournaments. Noticing Kael ignoring them, Sylvia scoffed and fired a high-speed, condensed mana arrow directly at the back of Kael's head to teach him a lesson. Kael didn't even blink. Without looking up from his book, he caught the lethal sniper arrow between his index and middle finger. Sylvia's smug smile vanished. That arrow carried enough kinetic force to shatter a boulder, and this random student had just caught it like a falling leaf. Kael finally looked up, his crimson eyes locking onto the Zenith elites. "If you're going to shoot someone in the back," he said lazily, "you should put some actual killing intent into it." With a casual flick of his wrist, Kael tossed the arrow back. It didn't just fly, it broke the sound barrier, tearing a massive trench through the stone courtyard. The arrow embedded itself deep into the reinforced academy wall, exactly 1 millimeter from Leon's cheek. The Zenith prodigy was frozen in absolute terror. Without another word, Kael went back to his book and walked away. The Zenith Institute had just met the F-rank trash of Solaria Academy. The Inter-Academy tournament wasn't a simple duel. It was a 1,000-student battle royale drop into the Whispering Woods, designed to test survival against rival schools and wild monsters. 5 elite academies participated: Solaria, Zenith, Aegis Bastion, Umbra Institute, and Ignis Academy. But behind closed doors, the other 4 schools had formed a secret alliance to wipe out Solaria first. Within the first hour of the drop, Solaria's students were being systematically hunted. Kael, however, was taking a casual stroll through the forest, armed with nothing but a standard-issue wooden practice sword. His peaceful walk didn't last. He stepped into a clearing and was immediately surrounded by an elite 20-man hit squad comprised of the top rankers from all 4 rival academies. A massive vanguard from Aegis Bastion stepped forward, laughing. "Look what we caught. Solaria's famous F-rank trash. This is going to be almost too easy." Kael looked at the 20 highest-ranked prodigies in the nation. He didn't summon his shadows. He didn't activate his void system. He just sighed. Without warning, 3 Umbra Institute assassins dropped from the canopy above, their daggers aimed perfectly at Kael's vital points. Kael didn't even look up. He sidestepped a fraction of an inch and swung the wooden stick. The 3 assassins were swatted out of the air like annoying flies, knocked unconscious instantly. Enraged, the Aegis Bastion vanguard activated his ultimate defense skill and charged forward like a freight train, intending to crush Kael against a tree. Kael didn't dodge. He extended the wooden sword, tapping the absolute dead center of the vanguard's mana flow. The impenetrable S-rank shield shattered into a million pieces like cheap glass. The kinetic feedback sent the giant crashing to his knees, his armor cracking from the inside out. The remaining students froze in sheer horror. Panicking, the Ignis Academy fire mages abandoned their strategy and unleashed a massive, combined inferno, desperate to incinerate the anomaly. Kael blinked. He didn't teleport away, he teleported directly into their blind spot, letting their own massive fireball detonate harmlessly against the empty forest. With a single, lazy sweep of the wooden sword, the raw air pressure alone blasted the remaining prodigies off their feet, pinning them against the ancient trees. In less than 60 seconds, the Allied Academy's top 20 prodigies were annihilated. Kael tossed the stick aside and kept walking. He was already bored of this tournament. Back in the floating stadium, the cheers died instantly. Millions of viewers stared in dead silence as the live feed displayed the Allied Academy's top 20 prodigies unconscious in the dirt. In the VIP balcony, Professor Vane was sweating bullets. The other Academy headmasters were furiously demanding to know who this F-rank monster was. Unaware, or simply uncaring, that he was being broadcast to the entire nation, Kael continued his stroll through the Whispering Woods, heading straight for the Zenith Institute's base camp. Deep in the forest, Leon sat on a boulder at the Zenith base camp, waiting for his hit squad to return with Kael's badge. Up in the canopy, Sylvia scanned the perimeter through her sniper scope. Her breath hitched. It wasn't her hit squad returning. Panicking, Sylvia abandoned protocol and rapid-fired 3 maximum lethality piercing arrows directly into the dark brush. Kael didn't even slow his pace. He casually swatted the armor-piercing arrows out of the air with the back of his bare hand like they were cobwebs. Kael stepped into the clearing. Leon bolted upright, drawing his legacy weapon, the Crimson Colossus, a great sword capable of cleaving a mountain. Humiliated by his previous encounter, Leon poured 100% of his mana into the blade, leaping into the air to execute Kael with a single, devastating strike. The viewers in the stadium braced for an explosion. But the blast never came. Kael had stopped the ultimate zenith strike with a single, raised index finger. Leon hung suspended in the air, his mind completely shattering. The physical force alone should have crushed Kael's bones, but the boy hadn't even flinched. Kael simply flicked his finger. The legacy greatsword shattered into 1,000 pieces, the kinetic feedback blasting Leon backward into the dirt. Kael stood over the trembling Zenith prodigy, casually ripping the tournament badge off his uniform. The Zenith Institute's leader was officially eliminated. Up in the stadium, the Zenith headmaster erupted in fury, screaming that Kael must be cheating, that an F-rank commoner couldn't possibly possess that kind of physical strength. Down in the forest, Kael looked directly up into the floating broadcast drone. He gave a cold, arrogant smirk to the millions watching. He wasn't participating in a tournament, he was hunting. Up in the tournament control room, the Zenith headmaster had seen enough. Furious at his academy's public humiliation, he grabbed the lead administrator by the collar. "Release the Calamity Behemoth," the headmaster ordered. "Drop it directly on that F-rank trash. I want him crushed before he takes another step." Deep in the forest, Sylvia was still hiding in the canopy when the ground began to violently quake. It felt like a localized earthquake. Kael stopped walking. The ancient trees around him began to splinter and crack as the ground beneath his feet completely caved in. From the depths of the earth, the Calamity Behemoth erupted. It was an S-rank artificial monster, designed to wipe out entire platoons of elite students. The live broadcast captured it all. Millions of viewers in the stadium leaped from their seats in sheer panic, realizing the administrators had unleashed the final boss on day one. The beast unleashed a deafening roar, producing a kinetic shockwave so powerful it flattened the surrounding forest into a barren crater. Standing at ground zero of the shockwave, Kael didn't summon a shield. He didn't blink away. He just brought a hand up to his mouth and yawned. Furious at the lack of fear, the 30-foot behemoth lunged, snapping its massive, metallic jaws down to bite the anomaly entirely in half. Kael didn't use a spell. He just condensed a fraction of his void mana into his right fist and threw a simple, brutally fast uppercut. His fist connected with the beast's metallic jaw. The impact didn't just crack the armor, it created a localized sonic boom that shattered the air. The laws of physics snapped. The sheer kinetic force of the F-rank student's punch lifted the multi-ton behemoth off the ground, flipping it backward through the air. The final stage boss crashed into the earth like a fallen meteor, completely unconscious. The fight had lasted exactly 3 seconds. In the control room, the system monitors flashed red. Boss defeated. The Zenith headmaster dropped to his knees. His trap hadn't just failed, it had proven Kael's absolute supremacy. Kael stood atop the unconscious beast, staring directly into the broadcast drone. "If the administrators want to play," he said smoothly, "send something that won't die in one punch." In the floating stadium, the shock finally broke into absolute pandemonium. The Solaria students, who had been bullied for hours, erupted into deafening cheers. Their trash student was a god. Up in the VIP balcony, Arya let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. A faint, reluctant smile crossed her face. The hierarchy of the entire kingdom had just shifted. But inside the Whispering Woods, the remaining competitors from the rival academies were in sheer panic. Realizing they were being hunted, they abandoned the tournament rules. Led by the surviving commanders of Aegis Bastion and Umbra, 500 elite students formed a desperate, unprecedented alliance. Their only objective, eliminate the F-rank anomaly. Kael didn't try to hide. He walked openly down the main path, his footsteps light and completely unbothered, acting like a VIP on a leisurely stroll. He stepped into the clearing and was immediately boxed in by the 500-man army. Hundreds of staffs, swords, and bows were pointed directly at his chest. "Fire!" the Aegis commander roared. Unwilling to take any chances, the army unleashed a synchronized, combined bombardment of raw mana that could level a mountain. As the apocalyptic wave of magic descended upon him, Kael simply tapped his foot against the dirt. "You kids are too loud," he muttered. A massive, impenetrable dome of thick black shadows erupted from his shadow, completely swallowing the F-rank student just as the blast hit. The explosion shook the forest. When the smoke cleared, the 500 prodigies gasped. The shadow dome hadn't even sustained a scratch. The dome peeled back. Kael wasn't standing anymore. He was sitting lazily on a massive throne crafted entirely from swirling dark mana, flanked by 50 towering shadow knights. The Aegis commander dropped his sword into the dirt. He realized immediately that this wasn't an academy student. This was an S-rank dungeon boss wearing a school uniform. Kael rested his chin on his fist, looking down at the trembling army with absolute boredom. He gave a lazy, two-finger wave. "Teach them a lesson. But don't kill them." The 50 shadow knights surged forward like a black tidal wave. They didn't even use the sharp edges of their blades, simply swatting the elite prodigies into the air like toys. Kael closed his eyes, listening to the screams of the rival academy's best and brightest as his shadows dismantled their pride in less than a minute. The tournament was officially over. In the control room, the Zenith headmaster snapped. Watching a Solaria F-rank single-handedly humiliate his academy's entire military philosophy was too much. He drew his S-rank weapon. Violating every international law, he forced the administrators to activate an emergency teleportation circle, dropping himself directly onto Kael's coordinates. A blinding pillar of blue light crashed into the clearing. The Zenith headmaster stepped out, his immense, suffocating S-rank mana pressure forcing the remaining students to the ground. "Enough," the headmaster roared, his voice echoing through the forest. "I don't know what dark artifact you are using to cheat, boy, but I will execute you myself." Kael didn't even stand up from his shadow throne. He just rested his cheek on his knuckles and sighed. An S-rank educator throwing a tantrum. How pathetic. Enraged, the headmaster lashed out. His purple whip sword extended into a razor-sharp, toxic energy whip, moving fast enough to cleanly decapitate Kael. But the attack never landed. Kael caught the S-rank energy whip completely bare-handed, his passive void mana nullifying the toxic burn instantly. Kael finally stood up. With a brutal, effortless yank, he pulled the whip, ripping the S-rank headmaster entirely off his feet and dragging him through the dirt. Before the older man could recover, Kael stepped into his guard, driving a devastating, void-enhanced knee directly into the headmaster's sternum. The headmaster crashed into the dirt at Kael's feet, his S-rank weapon shattering into useless fragments. His lungs seized, he couldn't even breathe. Kael placed his boot on the back of the headmaster's head, crushing his face into the dirt. "You came into my forest to teach me a lesson," Kael whispered. The elite headmaster began to weep in sheer terror, his aristocratic pride completely broken by the overwhelming presence of a true sovereign. The live broadcast didn't cut out. Millions of people, including the king himself, watched in absolute, horrified silence as an academy student forced an S-rank headmaster to beg for his life. Having proven his absolute dominance, Kael removed his foot and walked away. The shadow throne dissolved into smoke. He had broken the spirit of the entire kingdom. Before leaving, Kael stopped and looked directly into the broadcast drone. He pointed one finger at the lens. "If the royal family wants me," he stated, "they can come to me themselves."